If you crave dark dystopian romance, overpowered fated mates, and a fierce heroine willing to burn a corrupt empire to the dirt, you are in the exact right place. Hit subscribe, turn off the lights, and let's enter the world of the Confederation. In a ruined society ruled by cruel hunters and high-tier witches, survival means staying invisible. Falling for a chained monster isn't just forbidden, it is a declaration of war. There is one rule when you owe the Confederation 50,000 silver marks. Keep your head down and scrub the blood off the floor. The human hunters and witches rule this world with shock sticks and iron cages. They own my life, just like they own the feral wolves they force into slavery. They told me my magic was a useless, broken spark. They told me to fear the beast chained in the lowest dungeon of the compound, Subject 0, the Primordial Alpha King. They kept him starved and bound in pure silver for a century, convinced they broke his spirit. I was just supposed to bandage his wounds and walk away. I never planned to cross the line. I never planned to shatter his unbreakable collar, and I sure as hell never planned to wake him up. But the council made one fatal mistake. They forgot that even a tiny spark can burn an empire to the dirt. Chapter 1. Nora stood before the reinforced steel door of Sub-Level 9. The damp air of the underground prison clung to her skin. Her gray canvas uniform offered no warmth against the permanent chill. She gripped the handle of her frayed willow weave basket. Inside rattled her meager assigned supplies: a glass bottle of cheap yellow antiseptic, a dented tin of cold burn paste, a stack of coarse cotton bandages, and iron shears. She owed the Confederation 50,000 silver marks. It was a crushing financial ruin left behind by her dead parents. The ruling council of humans and high-tier witches owned her. The crushing debt guaranteed she would scrub blood and wrap wounds in these dark tunnels for the rest of her life. She turned the heavy key. The metal hinges screamed. Nora pushed the door open and stepped into the cavernous cell. Subject 0 hung suspended in the center of the room. He was the Primordial Alpha, a beast who walked the earth long before hunters built their modern cities. Thick silver chains bound his massive wrists to the stone ceiling. Smoke hissed from his skin where the cuffs dug deep. Wolves burned against pure metal without thick protective leather. He possessed no armor. The silver seared straight through his flesh, keeping him weak. A black metal shock collar sat tight around his throat. Battle scars mapped his bare chest. He lifted his head. His eyes locked onto hers. They shone like spun gold. Tear her throat out. Paint the floor red. The wild beast roared inside Bael's mind. The ancient wolf paced in the dark corners of his thoughts, starving for violence. Quiet, Bael commanded the animal. We wait. She brings the medicine. Nora forced her boots to move forward. Panic spiked in her chest, but she refused to let her hands shake. She set her woven basket on the stone floor. The glass bottle clinked against the iron shears. The sound echoed off the bare walls. I need to clean the wounds, Nora said. Bael let out a low, rumbling growl. The sound vibrated through the soles of Nora's boots. She flinched and took a half-step back. I won't bite, Bael rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. Not today. Nora swallowed hard. She popped the cork out of the yellow antiseptic. Good, because I don't get paid enough to deal with missing fingers. Bael watched her step closer. She smelled like sweet strawberries and fresh dirt. It was a good scent. He liked it. Most humans wet themselves when they entered this room. This girl just complained about her wages. She poured the stinging liquid onto a strip of cotton. She pressed the cloth against the raw burns on his left wrist. The silver chains groaned as his muscles twitched. You flinched, Nora noted. She kept her focus on the angry red skin, refusing to meet his golden gaze again. The metal burns, Bael replied. You have a smart mouth for a bottom-tier medical grunt. And you have a lot of patience for an immortal terror, Nora shot back. She tossed the dirty cotton into her basket and pulled out the dented tin of paste. The Confederation treats you like a science experiment. Why don't you fight back?" "Show her our teeth," the beast barked. "Hush," Bael told the wolf. He leaned his head back against the chains. "The collar delivers a shock that can drop a bear. The silver drains my strength. I am starved. Fighting back right now is suicide." Nora scooped a glob of cold paste onto her bare fingers. She smeared it over the deepest cuts along his forearms. "Then you need a better plan." "Maybe I do," Bael murmured. "What is your name, little witch?" "Nora," she answered. "And don't call me little. I stand at a very respectable average height." A rough chuckle rumbled in Bael's chest. The sound surprised him. He had not laughed in a century. Nora wrapped a clean bandage around his wrist and tied a tight knot. She moved to his right arm and started the process over again. She did not rush. She made sure the medicine covered every burn. "Your magic is weak," Bael observed. He tracked the erratic, fading pulse of energy beneath her skin. "Barely a spark." "It's enough to warm a cup of tea," Nora muttered, "which makes me useless to the High Council, hence the uniform and the scrub brush." When she finished tying the final bandage, she wiped her hands on her canvas pants. She packed her supplies back into the woven basket. "I'll return tomorrow," Nora stated. She picked up her load. "Bring more of that paste," Bael demanded. "The cold helps the burns." "I bring what they give me," Nora said. She turned toward the exit. "Try not to anger the guards while I'm gone. I hate using the iron shears to cut away dead skin." She walked out of the cell and shut the heavy door behind her, locking the Alpha in the dark. Chapter 2. 3 weeks passed. The trips to Sub-Level 9 became a strict routine. Nora marched down the concrete stairs every afternoon with her frayed willow weave basket. She knew the exact rotation of the guards. She knew Bael's breathing patterns. The sheer terror of standing near a demigod faded, replaced by a strange, quiet comfort. Nora pushed the heavy steel door open. Bael sat on the cold floor, the silver chains pulled taut above his head. His eyes tracked her movements. "She belongs to the pack. Claim her," the beast grumbled in his mind. The wild wolf no longer paced. It sat at attention, focused pure and unwavering on the girl with the sweet scent. "Stand down," Bael instructed his inner self. "She is fragile." Nora dropped her basket. The contents rattled. She pulled out the glass bottle and the coarse bandages. "You look worse today. Did they restrict your food again?" "They feed me rotten meat," Bael answered. "I refuse to eat it." "Starving yourself won't win a war," Nora scolded. She poured the yellow antiseptic onto a fresh cloth. She stepped into his space and grabbed his left arm. The burns looked angrier, the skin blistering around the pure metal cuffs. "I am not a scavenger," Bael growled. "I don't eat garbage." "You are stubborn," Nora corrected. She pressed the soaked cloth into his wounds. Bael clenched his jaw but made no sound. "If you die of starvation, Garrick wins. He gets to put your skeleton in a museum." Garrick was the human hunter captain who ran the underground facility. The mere mention of his name made the air in the cell drop 10 degrees. Bael's muscles bunched beneath her fingertips. "Garrick is a tick feeding on a dog," Bael snarled. "When I break these chains, I will crush his skull." "Sure you will," Nora teased, pulling the dented tin of paste from her basket. "Right after I finish warming my tea with my phenomenal cosmic powers." Bael watched her smear the cold medicine over his blistering skin. "Why do you hide your strength, Nora?" She paused. "I told you, I have a spark. It's defective. My parents borrowed the silver marks to pay for magical tutors, hoping to fix me. It didn't work. They died, and the Confederation came to collect the debt." "Power isn't about the size of the flame," Bael said. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "It is about the focus of the heat. You wrap my wounds with more precision than the royal healers who served my court a century ago. You just lack anger." Nora scoffed. Anger doesn't pay off 50,000 marks. Keeping my head down does. She finished bandaging his left arm and moved to the right. The constant proximity forced a physical closeness that made her skin prickle. He radiated heat. The scent of crushed pine needles filled her senses, drowning out the damp smell of the dungeon. "If you let me loose, I will erase your debt," Bael offered. "By murdering the entire council?" Nora asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's a very effective accounting method," Bael replied. Nora snorted. She tied the final knot on his bandage. "I'll stick to my miserable paycheck. I prefer my head attached to my neck." She packed up her supplies. As she reached for the handle of her basket, Bael shifted his weight. The chains rattled loud in the quiet room. "You aren't a coward, Nora," Bael said. "You talk back to a monster every day. Stop pretending you belong on your knees." Nora stopped. She stared at the rough stone floor. The words struck a chord deep in her chest. She grabbed her basket and stood up straight. "I'll see you tomorrow, Bael," she said, turning away. She locked the door behind her, but his words followed her all the way up the stairs. Chapter 3. The next afternoon, the routine shattered. Nora reached the bottom of the concrete stairs and froze. 3 armed guards stood outside the steel door of sub-level 9. Standing in the center of the hallway was Captain Garrick. The human hunter wore a pristine black uniform. He held a long, black electric shock stick in his right hand. The tip crackled with blue energy. Nora tightened her grip on the willow weave basket. Hidden deep in her apron pocket was a small, frosted glass jar. She stole it from the upper medical bay an hour ago. It contained a high-grade numbing salve meant for council members. If Garrick caught her with it, he would execute her on the spot. "Ah, the little maid," Garrick sneered. He gestured toward the heavy door. "Open it. Subject 0 needs his daily reminder of who holds the leash." Nora kept her face blank. She stepped forward, inserted her key, and pushed the door open. Bael hung from the ceiling. His eyes snapped to Garrick. The golden irises flared with pure hatred. "Good afternoon, beast," Garrick said, stepping into the cell. "Tear his arms off," the inner wolf demanded, thrashing against the mental cage. "Soon," Bael promised. Garrick didn't hesitate. He thrust the shock stick forward, pressing the crackling tip directly against Bael's bare chest. Blue electricity surged through the Alpha's body. Bael's back arched. The silver chains snapped tight. A low, agonizing groan escaped his lips. Nora bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. She forced herself to stand still and watch. "The witches want to run an extraction tomorrow," Garrick announced, pulling the stick back. "They need spinal fluid. Try to rest up. We need you alive for the drill." Garrick turned to Nora. He eyed her woven basket. "Clean him up. I want the wounds wrapped tight. Make sure he doesn't bleed out before the procedure." "Yes, Captain," Nora answered. Garrick marched out of the cell. The guards followed, leaving the heavy door cracked open. Nora dropped her basket. She rushed to Bael's side. The smell of singed hair and burned flesh filled the air. Bael's chest heaved. He struggled to catch his breath. "Spinal fluid," Bael rasped. "The drill will paralyze me." "Sit still," Nora ordered. Her hands shook. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the stolen frosted glass jar. She twisted the lid off. The thick, white salve smelled like mint. Bael watched her scoop a large amount onto her fingers. "That isn't your cheap paste." "I stole it from the upper bay," Nora whispered. She pressed the salve directly onto the fresh burn on his chest. The relief was instant. The numbing agent sank into his skin, killing the agonizing pain of the electric shock. Bael closed his eyes. "You risked your life for this," Bael stated. It was not a question. "She protects the pack," the inner wolf purred. "You need your strength," Nora said, her voice trembling. "If they drill into your spine, you won't ever walk again. You'll be a permanent science experiment." "There is nothing I can do," Bael said, opening his eyes. "The silver keeps me bound. The black collar cuts off my access to the shift. I am trapped in this skin. Nora finished applying the stolen salve. She screwed the lid back onto the frosted jar and hid it deep in her apron. She looked at the heavy black metal locked around his throat. I can't break the silver chains, Nora whispered. I don't have the keys. Then tomorrow I become a statue, Bael replied. His voice held no fear, only a cold, dark acceptance. Nora packed her basket in silence. Her mind raced. She couldn't let Garrick destroy him. She walked out of the cell, the heavy weight of the impending extraction pressing down on her shoulders. Chapter 4. The boots echoed loud against the stone floor. Nora stood in the corner of the cell, clutching her woven basket to her chest. Garrick entered sub-level 9. 2 lab technicians followed him. They pushed a metal cart holding a motorized bone drill. The silver needle looked as thick as a man's finger. Bael hung from the chains. He watched the cart roll closer. The inner beast snarled in defiance, but Bael knew the truth. The silver had drained too much of his life force. He could not fight. Turn him around, Garrick ordered the technicians. The 2 men grabbed the chains. They yanked hard, spinning Bael so his back faced the drill. The Alpha let out a sharp grunt of pain as the metal cuffs bit deeper into his raw wrists. Set the drill, Garrick commanded. Aim for the lower lumbar. We need a full vial. One technician powered on the machine. A high-pitched whine filled the room. The drill bit spun, a blur of silver metal. Nora stared at the needle. She pictured it piercing Bael's spine. She pictured the demigod paralyzed, spending eternity locked in this dark room, never shifting into his true form again. The tiny spark of magic dormant in her blood suddenly flared hot. Bael's words echoed in her mind. Power isn't about the size of the flame. It is about the focus of the heat. Nora dropped her basket. The glass bottle shattered against the stone floor, spilling yellow antiseptic everywhere. Garrick spun around. What are you doing, you clumsy fool? Nora didn't answer. She sprinted past the cart. She lunged forward and grabbed the black metal shock collar wrapped around Bael's neck. Get away from him, Garrick yelled, raising his electric stick. Nora ignored the hunter. She closed her eyes. She grabbed the tiny, weak spark of magic in her chest and shoved it straight down her arms. She focused every ounce of her will into her fingertips. She didn't try to explode the collar. She pushed the heat directly into the intricate locking gears hidden inside the metal band. A sharp jolt of electricity bit her palms, but she held on. Break, Nora commanded in her mind. A loud snap echoed over the whine of the drill. The internal lock shattered. The heavy black collar sprang open and fell to the stone floor with a heavy thud. The shift was instantaneous. The magical suppression vanished. Bael threw his head back and roared. The sound was not human. It was a terrifying primordial howl that shook dust from the ceiling. The pure, untamed energy of the first wolf surged through his veins, overpowering the burn of the silver chains. Garrick stumbled backward, his face pale. The technicians abandoned the metal cart and ran for the door. Nora stood frozen, her hands burned and stinging. She stared up at the giant man. The collar was gone. The beast was awake. Bael twisted his wrists. The thick silver chains groaned under the sudden massive strain. Stand behind me, Nora, Bael ordered. His golden eyes locked onto Garrick. The accounting begins now. Chapter 5. The snap of the internal lock echoed through the damp room. The heavy black collar sprang open. It hit the stone floor with a dull thud. The shift hit Bael like a lightning strike. The magical suppression vanished. A century of dormant, primal power roared back into his veins. He threw his head back. A terrifying, inhuman howl tore from his throat. The sound shook the dust from the ceiling. Garrick stumbled backward. The hunter captain's face drained of color. The 2 lab technicians abandoned their motorized bone drill and scrambled for the open doorway. Nora stood frozen. Her palms stung from the electrical jolt. The skin burned red, but she ignored the pain. She stared up at the giant man. Bael twisted his arms. The pure silver cuffs dug deep into his wrists. Werewolves possessed zero natural defense against raw silver. The metal seared his flesh, leaving deep, blistering wounds. Smoke curled from the contact points. He ignored the agony. The ancient beast inside his mind demanded freedom. He planted his bare feet against the stone wall. He pulled. The thick silver chains groaned. The metal links stretched. With a final, explosive surge of brute strength, the chains shattered. Shards of silver rained down onto the floor. Bael landed in a crouch. He rubbed his bleeding wrists, the golden fire in his eyes fixed on the fleeing captain. "Stop him!" Garrick screamed from the hallway. Two armed guards rushed into the cell. They raised their electric rifles. Bael moved. He crossed the room in a blur of motion. He caught the first guard by the throat and slammed him into the stone wall. The concrete cracked. The man dropped his weapon and slumped to the floor. The second guard fired a stun dart. Bael dodged the projectile. He struck the man in the chest, sending him sprawling into the metal medical cart. The inner wolf raged. Hunt the captain, break his bones, paint the walls red. Bael stepped toward the hallway. He wanted to chase Garrick down the corridors and tear him apart. He took one step, muscles bunched for a sprint. "Stop!" Nora shouted. Bael spun around. He bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Nora didn't flinch. She wiped her stinging hands on her canvas uniform. "If you chase him, 100 more guards will block the main stairs. They carry silver nets and tranquilizers. We need an exit, not a slaughter." The beast paced in Bael's mind. It wanted blood. It wanted vengeance. But it looked at the girl. She stood her ground in a room full of broken men and shattered chains. She possessed no fear. She leads, the inner wolf decided. She protects the pack. Bael forced his breathing to slow. He unclenched his fists. The rational part of his brain took over. She was right. He lacked the stamina for a drawn-out war. Starvation gnawed at his stomach. His wrists bled freely. "You know the layout," Bael rasped. "Lead the way, witch." Nora grabbed a roll of dry gauze from her spilled basket, snatching it before the yellow antiseptic soaked the cotton. She tossed it to him. "Wrap your wrists. We are taking the bio-waste corridors." Chapter 6. Red emergency lights bathed the concrete hallways. Sirens wailed, sending a piercing shriek through the underground facility. Nora ran down the tight, damp corridor. Bael followed close behind. His bare feet made no sound on the linoleum. The air smelled of harsh bleach and old rust. Nora knew every inch of Sector 4. She spent 3 years scrubbing these exact floors. "Turn left at the next junction," Nora whispered. She paused at a corner and peeked around the concrete edge. A squad of 4 hunters jogged past the intersection. They held silver-tipped rifles close to their chests. Nora held her breath. Bael stepped up behind her, his broad chest pressed against her back. He radiated furnace heat. She felt the steady, calm rhythm of his heartbeat. It anchored her racing pulse. Once the hunters passed, Nora darted across the junction. "You navigate well for a medical grunt," Bael noted. He kept his voice low. "I empty the hazardous waste bins," Nora replied. She pushed open a swinging door marked with a yellow hazard triangle. "Nobody wants to patrol the trash routes." They entered a long tunnel lined with thick metal pipes. Steam hissed from loose valves. Bael's breathing grew ragged. A century of forced starvation began to take its toll. The adrenaline of the initial breakout faded. His steps grew heavy. Blood soaked through the crude gauze wraps on his wrists. "Keep moving," Nora urged. She glanced back at him. "Don't you dare collapse on me. I can't carry a demigod." "I will not fall," Bael grumbled. They reached the end of the tunnel. A floor-to-ceiling security gate blocked their path. Thick steel bars formed a rigid grid. A heavy electronic keypad sat on the wall beside it. The red indicator light blinked in the dim corridor. Nora cursed under her breath. She slapped the keypad. "They locked the sector down. I don't have clearance codes for a total quarantine." She shoved her hands into her apron pockets, searching for any spare tool. She found nothing but the frosted glass jar of stolen salve. Frustration tasted like bitter ash in her mouth. "Stand back," Bael commanded. He stepped up to the steel grid. He wrapped his bleeding hands around two of the thick metal bars. The muscles in his back shifted and bulged. He planted his feet. A deep growl vibrated in his throat. The steel groaned under the immense pressure. The metal bolts holding the frame to the concrete wall screeched. Bael pulled outward. The bars bent, warped, and then tore free from their hinges with a deafening crack. He tossed the ruined gate aside. "Clearance granted," Bael rasped, stepping through the opening. Nora let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She rolled her eyes. "Show off. The surface stairs are right ahead." Chapter 7. Bael kicked the heavy maintenance hatch upward. The metal slab slammed against the concrete roof. Nora scrambled out of the dark stairwell. The crisp night wind hit her face. It felt like a splash of ice water. She took a deep breath, savoring the taste of unrecycled air. The Confederation compound above ground was pure chaos. Massive searchlights swept across the paved courtyard. Armed hunters shouted orders, running between the concrete barracks. Jeeps with mounted spotlights roared to life. Nora crouched behind a row of metal ventilation units. Bael crouched beside her. His golden eyes tracked the movement of the guards. "We need a vehicle," Nora stated. She scanned the motor pool 50 yards away. Most of the armored transports sat locked behind a second chain-link fence. But near the loading dock, a faded blue transport lorry idled. The engine rumbled. A panicked quartermaster stood beside it, loading wooden crates of medical supplies into the back. "The blue lorry," Nora pointed. "It's running." "I will clear the path," Bael said. Before Nora could argue, Bael surged forward. He bolted from cover. He crossed the open courtyard with terrifying speed. The quartermaster looked up, dropped a wooden crate, and let out a shriek of terror. The man didn't reach for his sidearm. He turned and ran toward the barracks, leaving the lorry unattended. Nora sprinted across the pavement. Her boots slapped against the concrete. She reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and climbed behind the steering wheel. Bael wrenched the passenger door open. He crammed his giant frame into the cabin. His knees hit the dashboard. "Drive," Bael ordered. Nora grabbed the gear shift. She possessed zero official driving experience, but she spent years watching the supply drivers grind the gears. She stomped on the clutch and shoved the stick forward. The lorry lurched. Gunfire erupted from the barracks. A bullet pinged against the metal side of the lorry. The side mirror shattered into a dozen pieces. Nora slammed her foot onto the gas pedal. The faded blue transport roared. The heavy tires spun against the pavement, finding traction. They rocketed toward the perimeter fence. "Brace yourself!" Nora yelled. The lorry crashed through the chain-link gate. Metal groaned and sparked against the bumper. The vehicle hit the dirt road on the other side, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Nora didn't look back. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She steered the lumbering transport away from the blinding compound lights and plunged into the pitch-black cover of the wild territory. Chapter 8. The faded blue lorry rattled down the uneven logging road. Branches scraped against the windshield. The headlights cut a narrow path through the dense, towering trees. An hour from the compound, the engine knocked. A loud hiss filled the cabin. White steam poured out from under the hood, blinding the windshield. The temperature gauge pinned itself to the red zone. A stray bullet had pierced the radiator back at the courtyard. The engine sputtered, choked, and died completely. The lorry rolled to a slow, agonizing halt in the mud. Nora hit the steering wheel with her palm. "Perfect!" "We walk from here," Bael stated. He pushed his door open and stepped out into the night. Nora climbed down. The forest was dead quiet, save for the hiss of the dying radiator. She walked around the front of the vehicle. Bael took 2 steps and stumbled. He caught himself against the hood of the lorry. The adrenaline crash hit him hard. A century of starvation, the brutal electrical shocks, and the raw silver burns drained the last reserves of his strength. His knees buckled. He dropped to the dirt, his breathing ragged and shallow. "Bael!" Nora rushed to his side. She grabbed his arm. "Get up! Garrick will track the tire treads. They will bring hounds." "My legs refuse to hold," Bael admitted. The inner wolf whined in frustration, angry at its own broken vessel. Nora looked at his towering frame. He outweighed her by 100 pounds of pure muscle. She ducked under his right arm and draped it over her shoulders. "You promised to erase my debt," Nora grunted. She planted her feet and pushed upward. "You do not get to die in the dirt." Bael leaned some of his weight onto her. They stood together. He looked down at her face. Her jaw was set in pure, stubborn determination. "You are relentless, witch," he murmured. "And you are exhausting," she shot back. "Move your feet." They left the dead lorry behind. They limped off the dirt road and pushed deep into the thick underbrush. The canopy blocked out the moonlight. Nora guided them through the darkness, relying on the sound of rushing water to keep their bearings. Every step burned her thighs. Bael grew heavier by the minute. After an hour of torturous walking, Nora spotted a cluster of large, jagged boulders forming a natural overhang. It created a dry, shallow cave hidden from the main trail. "In here," Nora directed. They ducked under the rock ceiling. Bael collapsed against the stone wall. He slid down to the dirt floor, his eyes sliding shut. Nora sank to her knees beside him. Her chest heaved. She reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed the smooth glass of the frosted jar. She still had the numbing salve. She opened the jar. "Stay awake, Alpha. The real work starts now." Chapter 9. The cave sat in pure, suffocating darkness. Nora leaned her back against the jagged stone wall. The air held a bitter chill. She shivered in her thin gray canvas uniform. Next to her, Bael slumped against the dirt floor. His chest hitched with every shallow breath. The flight from the ruined blue lorry drained his unnatural stamina. A century of starvation combined with the trauma of the pure silver cuffs left him shattered. Nora dug her hands into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed the smooth curve of the frosted glass jar. She pulled it out and twisted the lid off. The sharp, cool scent of mint cut through the stale air of the cave. "Give me your arms," Nora whispered. Bael cracked his eyes open. The golden irises lacked their usual fire. He let out a low, rattling breath and offered his wrists. Nora touched the crude gauze she wrapped around his arms back in sub-level 9. The white fabric was black with dried blood. She peeled the bandages back. Bael clenched his jaw. He made no sound, but the muscles in his forearms turned rigid as stone. The silver burns looked worse than before. The pure metal ate away the top layers of his flesh, leaving angry, blistering wounds that refused to close. "The silver poisons the blood," Bael rasped. His voice sounded like cracked glass. "It stops the healing." "Then we clean it out," Nora stated. She dipped 2 fingers into the frosted jar and scooped out a thick lump of the white mint salve. "Brace yourself. This will sting before it goes numb." She pressed the medicine directly into the open burns. Bael flinched. A deep growl vibrated in his throat. "Bite her!" the wild beast snapped inside his mind. The inner wolf hated pain. It thrashed against the mental barriers, confused and angry. "Quiet," Bael told the animal. "She is fixing the damage. Stand down." The beast huffed, pacing a tight circle in his thoughts. It settled near the edge of his consciousness, watching the girl with wary eyes. Nora worked the thick salve over every blister. She did not rush. She made sure the cooling mint covered the worst of the silver damage. The tension in Bael's shoulders began to drop. The numbing agent sank deep into his muscle tissue, killing the worst of the agony. "You threw away your life for a monster," Bael said. He watched her wipe her fingers on her canvas apron. "Garrick will hunt you until the end of your days. You owe 50,000 marks. The Confederation does not forgive debt." Nora snorted. She grabbed the edge of the dirty gauze and tied a loose knot over the fresh salve to keep the dirt out. My life consisted of a mop and a bucket. I scrubbed blood off concrete for high-tier witches who treated me like a stray rat. I didn't lose much. You lost safety, Bael countered. Safety in a cage is just a slower death, Nora replied. She met his golden gaze. You taught me that. You hung from those silver chains for 100 years and never begged them for mercy. I refused to beg Garrick for a mop. A rough chuckle tumbled from Bael's chest. The sound held genuine warmth. You possess a spine of steel, little witch. The council underestimated your spark. My magic is broken, Nora reminded him. It just gets hot. It doesn't cast spells or build shields. It shattered an unbreakable black metal collar, Bael pointed out. The council relies on complex runes and borrowed energy. You channeled pure, focused heat into a mechanical flaw. That isn't broken magic, Nora. That is precision. You are a weapon. The words hit Nora like a punch to the gut. Nobody ever called her a weapon. She was the debt slave, the bottom-tier grunt, the girl who cleaned up the mess. But sitting in the dark cave with the demigod, the idea took root in her mind. Bael leaned his head back against the jagged rocks. The mint salve did its job. The blinding pain receded to a dull throb, but a new ache took its place. His stomach twisted in a violent knot. The starvation threatened to tear him apart from the inside out. He needed food. He needed raw, visceral energy to fuel the healing process. The pain is gone, Bael murmured. His eyes drifted shut. But the tank is empty. The beast is starving. Rest tonight, Nora told him. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to preserve her body heat. We hide until the sun comes up, then we figure out how to feed a demigod. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. The terror of the escape faded, replaced by a strange, quiet trust. She broke the chains, and in return, the beast promised to fight for her. Chapter 10. The cold bit into Nora's bones. She woke with a start. The cave remained cloaked in shadows, but the first hint of gray morning light crept through the entrance. She rubbed her arms, her teeth chattering. The canvas uniform offered zero protection against the forest chill. She looked over. Bael's spot on the dirt floor was empty. Panic spiked in her chest. She scrambled to her feet. Bael? A deep, unnatural sound echoed from the woods outside the rock overhang. It sounded like thick tree branches snapping in half, mixed with a low, guttural snarl. Nora crept toward the cave entrance. She pressed her back against a jagged boulder and peeked around the edge. Bael stood in a small clearing 50 yards away. He possessed no shirt, his broad back facing her. The white mint salve still coated the nasty burn on his chest, and the bloody gauze snapped under his expanding muscles, falling away into the dirt. He dropped to his hands and knees. The shift began. It lacked the smooth, magical transition the tamed wolves displayed back at the compound. This was a raw, violent explosion of primordial power. Bael's spine arched, his bones cracked with the volume of pistol shots. Nora clamped a hand over her mouth. Thick, midnight black fur erupted from his skin. His shoulders broadened, ripping past the limits of human anatomy. His jaw elongated into a massive, terrifying snout. The transformation took less than 10 seconds, but it looked agonizing. When the bone cracking stopped, a monster stood in the clearing. The wolf dwarfed any beast Nora had ever seen. He stood tall enough to look a man in the eye without jumping. Muscles coiled under his dark coat like thick steel cables. His paws hit the dirt with the weight of falling anvils. This was the first wolf. The demigod the Confederation feared so much they locked him in the dark for a century. Hunt, the beast roared in Bael's mind. The hunger drove everything else away. Meat, blood, survival. Go, the human side of Bael agreed. We need the strength. The giant wolf sniffed the air. He caught the scent of a wild stag grazing upwind. He dropped low to the ground and vanished into the dense underbrush. He moved with a terrifying, silent grace. Nora held her breath, unable to tear her eyes away from the tree line. A moment later, chaos erupted. A massive stag burst from the bushes, its hooves tearing up the damp earth. The animal possessed a wide rack of antlers and a panicked, wide-eyed stare. It sprinted across the clearing. Bael exploded from the shadows. He did not run, he flew. He closed the distance in 3 giant bounds. He hit the stag's flank like a runaway freight train. The impact sounded like a boulder crashing into a brick wall. The stag tumbled to the dirt, kicking and thrashing. The Primordial Alpha pinned the prey to the forest floor. He sank his teeth into the animal's throat. A single, brutal twist of his massive head ended the fight. The stag went still. Nora slumped against the rock. The pulse in her throat jumped frantically. She witnessed the hunters feed the collared wolves in the compound. They tossed raw meat into iron troughs, and the tamed beasts snapped at each other for scraps. This was different. This was pure, unchained dominance. Bael tore into the meal. The starvation drove him to consume the raw meat with savage intensity. The fresh blood fueled his depleted magic. The horrible silver burns hidden beneath his thick black fur began to knit together, the poison burning out of his system. Nora watched him eat. The fear she felt back in Sub-Level 9 threatened to return. She just freed a walking force of nature. If he turned those golden eyes on her, she possessed 0 defense. Her tiny spark of heat would do nothing against a demigod who crushed bone with his bare teeth. The wolf finished his meal. He lifted his massive head. The golden eyes locked onto the jagged boulders where Nora hid. He knew she was there. He smelled the sweet strawberries and fresh dirt. Nora swallowed hard. She didn't run. She stood her ground, waiting to see what the beast would do next. The Primordial Alpha turned his massive body and started walking back toward the cave. Chapter 11. The giant black wolf approached the cave entrance. Blood stained his muzzle and chest fur. His golden eyes never left Nora's face. Every instinct in her human brain screamed at her to run, to flee into the deep woods and hide from the apex predator. She forced her boots to stay planted in the dirt. The wolf stopped 3 feet away. He towered over her, his broad head level with her chest. He let out a low, rumbling huff that blew warm air across her face. "The witch is cold," the inner beast growled in Bael's mind. The animal paced around its mental cage, satiated and calm from the fresh kill. "She shivers. She is pack. Fix it." "I know," Bael replied to the wolf. "Let her see we are safe." The Primordial Alpha dropped his massive head. He nudged Nora's shoulder with his wet nose. The touch was gentle, a jarring contrast to the brutal violence she witnessed in the clearing moments ago. Nora let out a shaky breath. She raised a trembling hand and pressed her palm against his thick neck. His fur felt coarse, but underneath the muscle radiated pure furnace heat. "You look a lot bigger without the chains," Nora whispered. The wolf huffed again, a sound of agreement. He stepped past her into the shallow cave. He turned a tight circle in the dirt and dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. He looked at her, then looked at the empty space next to his massive front paws. Nora understood the invitation. She abandoned her pride and walked over. She sank to the dirt floor and curled up against the wolf's broad chest. The heat transfer was instant. Bael's body acted like a massive radiator, chasing the bitter forest chill out of her bones. She pulled her canvas apron tight and rested her head against his breathing side. The scent of crushed pine needles, dry earth, and fresh blood filled her senses. It was strange, wild, and entirely comforting. "She trusts us," the inner beast purred. It curled up in the dark corners of Bael's mind, content. "We earned it," Bael answered. Nora closed her eyes. The physical exhaustion of the escape finally caught up to her. "The salve worked on your burns?" The wolf let out a soft rumble. The mint medicine had killed the pain long enough for the shift to burn out the silver poison. His wrists still ached, but the flesh was knitting back together. "Good," Nora murmured. Her voice grew heavy with sleep. "Don't eat any hunters without me. I want to watch." The wolf rested his chin on his paws. He kept his golden eyes fixed on the forest outside the rock overhang. He listened to the wind rustle the tree branches. He tracked the scurrying of small animals in the underbrush. He stood guard over the sleeping girl. For 100 years, the Confederation told Bael he was a mindless weapon. They slapped a shock collar on his neck and treated him like a rabid dog. They tried to break his spirit with pure silver and starvation. They failed. The human hunter, Garrick, believed control came from a crackling electric stick. Garrick understood nothing about loyalty. Nora broke the unbreakable collar because she possessed a good heart. She risked the execution block to bring him stolen mint salve. She dragged him through the mud when his legs failed. This fragile, low-status medical maid showed more courage than the entire ruling council combined. "We kill the hunter captain," the inner beast declared. "We will," Bael promised the wolf. "We tear his empire down to the dirt." Nora slept for 3 hours. She did not dream of the damp, cold tunnels of Sublevel 9. She did not dream of the crushing 50,000-mark debt. She slept a deep, dreamless sleep, anchored by the steady heartbeat of the demigod beside her. When she finally woke, the morning sun pierced the tree canopy. The light hit the dirt floor of the cave. She sat up and stretched her stiff back. The wolf lifted his head. His ears swiveled forward, locking onto a sound deep in the woods. The golden eyes narrowed. A low, danger growl started deep in his chest. Nora froze. "What is it?" The wolf stood up. The fur along his spine bristled. He bared his teeth at the tree line. Danger approached. Chapter 12. The snap of a dry twig echoed through the trees. Nora scrambled to her feet. She backed away from the cave entrance. The giant black wolf stepped in front of her, blocking her body with his broad frame. "Track the treads," a rough human voice called out from the woods. "The blue lorry died down the logging road. They came this way. Keep the hounds tight." Nora's stomach plummeted. Confederation hunters. 4 men stepped into the small clearing. They wore the dark, tactical gear of the compound guards. 2 men held thick leather leashes attached to tracking hounds. The other 2 carried heavy silver mesh capture nets and electric rifles. The lead hunter spotted the cave. He raised his rifle. "Target located! Subject 0 is in the rocks! Net him!" Bael did not wait for the attack. The inner wolf roared for blood. He lunged out of the cave. The sheer speed of the Primordial Alpha caught the scouts off guard. He closed the distance before the second hunter could raise his silver net. Bael slammed into the man, crushing the hunter's chest with a single swipe of his massive paw. The man flew backward, slamming into a tree trunk. He did not get up. "Fire!" the lead hunter screamed. A crackling blue stun dart shot from the rifle. Bael twisted in midair. The dart grazed his thick shoulder fur, delivering a painful shock, but it failed to pierce the skin. Bael landed heavy on his front paws and snapped his jaws. He caught the barrel of the electric rifle. With a vicious jerk of his head, he shattered the weapon in half. The hounds barked and snapped, pulling at their leashes, but they refused to attack the alpha. Their natural instincts screamed at them to submit. The handlers yanked the chains, trying to force the dogs forward. Nora watched from the rocks. She grabbed a fist-sized stone from the dirt floor, her knuckles white. The third hunter panicked. He tossed the heavy silver mesh net. The weighted edges spread wide in the air. Bael tried to dodge, but the cave entrance restricted his movement. The silver net draped over his back. The raw metal burned through his thick fur, searing his skin. A roar of pure agony tore from the beast's throat. The silver drained his strength on contact, ripping the magical energy from his muscles. The hunter drew a shock stick, ready to strike the trapped wolf. Nora didn't think. She threw the heavy stone with everything she had. It sailed through the air and struck the hunter square in the jaw. The man stumbled, dropping his shock stick. Bael used the distraction. He pushed through the burning pain of the silver net. He forced his massive jaws open and clamped down on the hunter's leg, tossing him aside like a rag doll. The lead hunter dropped the hound leashes and ran. He sprinted back toward the logging road, abandoning his squad in sheer terror. Bael stood in the clearing, the silver net still smoking against his back. The shift broke. The magical drain from the raw metal was too much. His bones cracked and reshaped, forcing him back into his human form. He collapsed, bare to the dirt, his ruined pants lost to the shift, gasping for air. The silver mesh tangled around his skin, burning fresh wounds into his skin. Nora sprinted out of the cave. She dropped to her knees beside him. She grabbed the edge of the silver net. The metal bit into her palms, but she ignored the pain. She yanked the heavy mesh off his body and tossed it into the bushes. "Bael!" Nora grabbed his face. His skin felt clammy and cold. The golden fire in his eyes flickered. "I need more time," Bael choked out. The fight drained the energy he gained from the stag. The fresh silver burns looked raw and angry across his chest. Nora dug into her apron pocket, frantic. She pulled out the frosted glass jar and unscrewed the lid. She scooped out a thick glob of the white mint salve and smeared it over the new burns. "You idiot," Nora whispered, her voice shaking. "You took the net for me." Bael closed his eyes as the numbing medicine hit his skin. "Protect the pack." Nora sat back on her heels. She looked at the groaning hunters on the forest floor. The lead scout escaped. He was running back to Captain Garrick right now to report their exact location. A cold, hard realization settled in Nora's chest. They could not survive in the wild territory. Garrick possessed an army of guards, shock sticks, and silver nets. If they kept running, they would die exhausted in the dirt. The debt slave vanished. The medical maid disappeared. Nora stared at her own stinging hands. The tiny spark of heat flared in her blood. "We can't hide," Nora told the bleeding demigod. "Garrick will hunt us to the end of the earth." Bael opened his eyes. "Then we stop running." "We go on the offensive," Nora agreed. The sass returned, sharp and dangerous. "I know the compound layout. I know the patrol routes. It is time we teach the captain a lesson about broken locks." Chapter 13. The clearing smelled of pine needles and fresh blood. Bael lay bare in the dirt, his broad chest heaving. The silver burns painted ugly red streaks across his skin. Nora turned away from the demigod. She marched toward the two unconscious hunters near the tree trunk. The men wore standard Confederation tactical gear. "Get up," Nora ordered. "The lead scout is running back to Garrick. We have 20 minutes before they send a strike team." "I require attire," Bael grumbled. He pushed himself onto his elbows. The inner beast cared nothing for modesty, but the human side preferred pants. Nora knelt beside the closest downed hunter. She unbuckled the man's utility belt. She stripped him of his black canvas cargo pants and tossed the garments at Bael. "Put those on," Nora said. "I refuse to stage a rebellion with a naked alpha." Bael caught the clothes. He stood up, ignoring the sting of the fresh burns on his back. He shoved his legs into the pants. The hunter was a large man, but Bael was a giant. The dark canvas stretched tight across his thighs. The cuffs stopped mid-calf. He left the heavy belt unbuckled. "A perfect fit," Bael noted. Nora rolled her eyes. She returned to looting. She rummaged through the hunter's dropped gear. She found a heavy steel hunting knife inside a leather sheath. She clipped the sheath to her gray apron string. She found a full metal canteen and a small canvas survival pack containing a black brick radio, dried meat rations, and a flint striker. "Drink," Nora said, tossing him the canteen. Bael caught the metal flask. He unscrewed the cap and drained half the water in 3 gulps. The hydration helped. The mint salve cooled the fire on his chest. His strength crept back, steady and sure. They left the clearing. Bael took the lead, pushing deep into the untamed woods. His bare feet made zero noise on the forest floor. He tracked the wind, ensuring no hounds followed their scent. Nora matched his pace. Her canvas uniform snagged on thorn bushes. Her thighs burned from the brutal hike. She kept her mouth shut. They walked for hours as the sun climbed higher, baking the damp earth. They reached a rushing river. The water ran fast over slick gray stones. "We cross here," Bael stated. "The water breaks our scent trail. The hounds will lose us." Nora waded into the river. The freezing water numbed her heavy boots. The current pushed hard against her knees, threatening to sweep her downstream. Bael waded beside her. He offered his large hand. Nora took it. His furnace heat countered the ice-cold water. They reached the muddy far bank. Bael pulled her up the steep incline with ease. She dropped onto the grass, catching her breath. "Garrick will not stop. He will burn this forest to the ground to find you." "Garrick is a coward," Bael replied. He checked the wind again. "He relies on silver nets and shock sticks. Without his toys, he is nothing." "His toys work," Nora pointed out. "They kept you chained for 100 years." The inner wolf growled at the reminder. "We will crush his toys. We will crush his throat." "Patience," Bael told the beast. He looked down at the girl. "Why did your parents borrow 50,000 marks? You mentioned magical tutors." Nora sighed. She wrung the cold water out of her gray apron. "My spark never grew. High-tier witches cast fireballs and build energy shields. I could only heat small objects. My parents believed I was blocked. They borrowed the silver from the council to hire the best healers. The healers took the money and called me a lost cause. When the sickness took my parents, the council inherited the debt." "The council deals in lies," Bael said. "Your spark broke a demigod's collar. That is not a lost cause." "It felt like a punch to the gut," Nora admitted, rubbing her chest. "The magic ripped out of me. I do not know how to do it again." "You will learn," Bael promised. He turned and pointed through a break in the thick brush. A gray, rotting structure sat nestled between two giant oak trees. "Shelter," Bael announced. They approached the forgotten cabin. The wooden roof sagged in the middle. The front door hung crooked, suspended by a single rusted iron hinge. Weeds choked the front steps. It offered zero comfort, but it provided 4 solid walls. "Home sweet home," Nora muttered. She drew the stolen hunting knife and stepped onto the porch. Chapter 14. Nora pushed the crooked wooden door. The rusted iron hinge screamed, snapping under the pressure. The heavy door crashed inward, hitting the dusty floorboards with a loud bang. "Well," Nora sighed, "that is broken." "Leave it," Bael said, stepping past her into the dim interior. "We cannot just leave it on the floor," Nora said. She sheathed her hunting knife. She bent down and grabbed the edge of the heavy wood panel. "Any wild animal can walk right in. Help me lift it so we can wedge it back into the frame." Bael grabbed the top of the door. He hoisted it up with zero effort. Nora guided the bottom edge into the rotted wooden door frame. She kicked a heavy, split piece of firewood against the base, wedging the door tight against the frame. It would not open from the outside without a fight. "Secure," Nora declared, dusting her hands on her canvas pants. Bael surveyed the room. A cracked stone fireplace sat on the back wall. A rotted wooden table occupied the center of the room. Dust coated every surface. He walked over to the corner and sat on the floor, leaning his broad back against the wall. The adrenaline of the morning skirmish faded. The brutal reality of his injuries set in. The new silver burns across his chest and back throbbed with a sickening heat. Nora walked over to him. She dug into her apron pocket and pulled out the frosted glass jar. "You look terrible," Nora noted. "I feel worse," Bael admitted. Nora unscrewed the lid. The mint scent filled the dusty cabin. She scooped out the remaining white salve. She smeared it over the angry red burns on his chest. "She heals the pack," the beast purred in Bael's mind. The wild wolf rested its head on its paws, enjoying her gentle touch. "We need to talk about the collar," Nora said. She rubbed the cooling medicine into his skin. I told you my magic is weak. I can barely warm a cup of tea, yet I shattered a lock designed by the highest-tier witches in the Confederation. It makes no logical sense. Bael watched her focused face. You measure power by the size of the explosion. The Confederation teaches you that lie to keep you compliant. Then teach me the truth, Nora challenged. A high-tier witch uses a hammer, Bael explained. His rough voice echoed in the quiet cabin. They throw huge amounts of borrowed energy at a problem. They build a wall of fire. They summon a storm. It looks impressive. It terrifies the weak. Nora finished applying the salve. She wiped her fingers on her apron. And me? You are a scalpel, Bael stated. You do not possess a vast reservoir of energy. You possess a concentrated spark. When you grabbed my collar, you did not try to explode the entire metal band. You pushed a microscopic point of heat directly into the internal locking gears. You melted the pin. Nora stared at her palms. Precision. Pure precision, Bael confirmed. The witches in the compound could not replicate your feat. They would try to blast the collar, and the runes would absorb their wide attacks. Your spark bypassed the runes because it was too small, too focused to trigger the defenses. A strange sense of pride blossomed in Nora's chest. She spent her entire life believing she was broken. She scrubbed floors because the council deemed her worthless. Now, a primordial demigod sat in the dirt and called her a weapon. If I am a scalpel, Nora murmured, I need to learn how to cut. I will teach you, Bael promised. But magic alone will not keep you alive in the wild territory. Garrick trains his hunters in hand-to-hand combat. You need to learn how to hold a blade. I know how to scrub a floor, Nora countered. I doubt the stances are similar. Bael let out a rough bark of laughter. We will start basic training at dawn. Today, we rest. The silver took a heavy toll. Nora nodded. She walked over to the canvas survival pack she looted from the hunter. She pulled out 2 strips of dried meat. She tossed one to Bael and took a bite of the other. It tasted like salted shoe leather, but it filled the void in her stomach. She sat near the cracked stone fireplace, keeping her distance to let him rest. The woods outside grew dark. The wind howled through the gaps in the cabin logs. Nora watched the wedged door, her hand resting on the hilt of her stolen hunting knife. She did not feel like a maid anymore. Chapter 15. Morning sunlight sliced through the gaps in the cabin roof. Dust motes danced in the bright beams. Nora stood in the center of the rotted floorboards. She held the stolen steel hunting knife in her right hand. Her grip was awkward, her knuckles white from squeezing the leather hilt too tight. Bael stood 3 feet away. The mint salve had worked miracles overnight. The angry red burns on his chest faded to pale pink scars. He looked rested, dangerous, and huge in the tight black canvas pants. You hold the blade like a scrub brush, Bael criticized. You plan to clean the hunter's uniform before you stab him? I have never stabbed anyone, Nora shot back. She lowered the knife. My greatest enemy used to be a stubborn bloodstain on sub-level 9. She is fierce, the inner wolf huffed. Teach her the hunt. Bael stepped forward. He closed the distance between them, invading her personal space. Nora froze. The sheer size of him blocked out the sunlight. He smelled like crushed pine needles and dry earth. The intense warmth radiating from his skin made her pulse race. Loosen your grip, Bael instructed. His voice dropped to a low, gravelly rumble. He reached out. His large, calloused hand covered hers. He gently pried her stiff fingers open, adjusting them around the leather hilt. His touch was firm but surprisingly gentle. He stepped behind her, his broad chest brushing against her back. A shiver tracked down Nora's spine. Keep the blade angled up, Bael murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. He guided her arm forward in a slow, precise thrust. Do not hack. Slide the steel between the ribs. Use the enemy's forward momentum against them. Nora swallowed hard. The tactical lesson faded into the background. She felt surrounded by him. The Primordial Alpha, the terror of the Confederation, was holding her hand like she was the most important thing in the world. "Like this?" Nora asked, her voice breathless. She mirrored the thrusting motion. "Better," Bael praised. He stepped back, giving her room to breathe. "Garrick relies on his shock stick. He needs reach. If you get inside his guard, the stick is useless. You use the blade." Nora turned to face him. She sheathed the knife at her hip. "Garrick will not fight me. He will send 50 hunters to do his dirty work." "He will have to go through me first," Bael stated. "You cannot fight an army, Bael. Not even you." Nora crossed her arms over her gray apron. "We need a real plan. We cannot hide in this cabin forever." Bael walked over to the cracked stone fireplace. He leaned his forearm against the mantel. "The Confederation built their power on fear. They collar my brothers and use them as slaves. They trap girls like you with fake debts." 50,000 marks is very real," Nora corrected. "It is paper," Bael snarled, his golden eyes flashing. "I promised to clear your ledger. I do not break my vows, witch." "And how exactly do you plan to pay them?" "I will not pay them," Bael said. He pushed off the mantle and walked back to her. He stopped inches away, forcing her to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. "I will tear their stronghold down to the dirt. I will shatter every shot caller in the compound. I will burn the debt records in the main square. You freed the first wolf, Nora. I will free you." The intensity in his voice hit her like a boulder off her shoulders. Nobody had ever fought for her. Her entire life consisted of keeping her head down and surviving the daily grind. Now, a demigod vowed to burn an empire for her freedom. Nora stared into his golden eyes. The sassy remarks vanished from her tongue. She reached up and rested her palm flat against his bare chest, right over his steady, thundering heartbeat. Bael covered her small hand with his large one. The tension in the dusty cabin grew thick. The space between them vanished. Bael leaned down, his gaze dropping to her lips. A sudden, violent crash shattered the moment. The heavy wooden door, wedged tight just hours ago, exploded inward. Splinters of rotted wood rained across the cabin floor. The firewood wedge snapped in half. A giant gray wolf stood in the ruined doorway. Chapter 16. The gray wolf snarled. Saliva dripped from its sharp yellow teeth. A thick black metal shock collar sat tight around its neck, identical to the one Bael used to wear. The red indicator light on the metal band blinked, signaling active Confederation control. Nora jumped back, her hand dropping to the hilt of her hunting knife. Bael stepped in front of her. The golden fire ignited in his eyes. A terrifying, inhuman growl ripped from his throat. The collared wolf did not back down. The Confederation handlers drove the beast mad with electrical shocks, forcing it to track the Alpha. The gray wolf lunged. Bael caught the beast in midair. The impact sent both heavy bodies crashing into the rotted wooden table. The furniture splintered into 100 pieces. "Bite his throat!" the inner beast roared in Bael's mind. "Kill the challenger!" "No," Bael commanded his inner self. "He is a slave. He is pack." Bael refused to shift. He refused to use his claws. He wrestled the feral beast using brute human strength. He pinned the gray wolf to the floorboards, wrapping his thick arms around the animal's neck to avoid the snapping jaws. The gray wolf thrashed wildly. Its rear claws raked across Bael's legs, tearing the black canvas pants and slicing into his calves. Bael grunted in pain but held his grip tight. "Bael!" Nora shouted. "Stay back!" Bael yelled over his shoulder. The gray wolf twisted its head. Its jaws clamped down hard on Bael's left shoulder. Blood welled up around the sharp teeth. The Alpha let out a roar of pain, but he still refused to strike a lethal blow. He reached for the black metal collar, trying to find the locking mechanism to free his brother. The collar sparked. A remote handler miles away in the woods triggered the shock. Blue electricity arched from the metal band, surging through the gray wolf and straight into Bael. Both bodies convulsed. Bael's grip loosened. The gray wolf shook free and scrambled back, preparing for a second lethal lunge. Nora watched the demigod bleed. She watched the slave wolf prepare to kill its true king. The tiny spark of magic dormant in Nora's chest flared. It did not stay small. The fear and anger fueled the heat. It grew from a spark into a roaring, uncontrollable fire. It burned through her veins, turning her blood to lava. She did not think. She acted. Nora sprinted forward, stepping between Bael and the attacking beast. She raised her bare hands. She did not aim for the locking gears. She did not aim for a microscopic pin. She focused the raging heat inside her chest and shoved it outward. The air around her palms began to shimmer and warp with a violent, terrifying heat, building toward an explosive release. Chapter 17. Nora did not aim. She just pushed the roaring, uncontrollable fire out of her palms. A shockwave of pure, rippling thermal energy erupted from her hands. The invisible wave struck the gray wolf mid-lunge. The kinetic force slammed the heavy beast backward with the power of a swinging battering ram. The wolf flew through the air, crashing hard against the cracked stone fireplace. The impact shook the dusty cabin. A shower of loose mortar and soot rained down on the scorched floorboards. The animal slumped to the dirt, stunned and gasping for air. Nora stood frozen. Her bare hands shook. The air in the cabin shimmered with residual heat. The wooden floorboards beneath her boots smoldered, smelling of ash and roasted pine. The tiny spark she cursed her entire life possessed the power to level a room. Bael pushed himself up from the ruined table debris. He ignored his bleeding shoulder. He stared at the burned floorboards, then looked at the girl. "A scalpel," Bael rasped. A fierce, proud grin spread across his face. "It seems you found your hammer, witch." Nora lowered her hands. The roaring fire in her chest settled back into a steady, powerful hum. She looked at the stunned gray wolf near the fireplace, then turned to the alpha. "I told you not to call me little," Nora said. The gray wolf whined. It shook its broad head, trying to clear the stun. The beast looked at Bael, then looked at Nora. The wild animal shrank back, pressing its belly to the floor in a clear sign of submission. "The beast yields to you," Bael noted. He walked over to the gray wolf. The animal did not fight as the alpha approached. Bael dropped to one knee. He gripped the thick metal band locked around the wolf's neck with both hands. The bite wound on his left shoulder tore wider with the movement, spilling fresh blood down his bare chest. He ignored the pain. With a brutal surge of strength, he pulled the collar apart. The metal groaned, warped, and snapped, falling useless to the dirt. The gray wolf took a deep breath. The engineered madness left its eyes. The shift took hold. The beast's bones cracked and reshaped, shrinking back into human form. A young man lay on the floorboards, bare and shivering. He looked no older than Nora. Scars crisscrossed his pale skin from years of Confederation abuse. "My king," the young man choked out. He bowed his head against the dusty wood. "Rise," Bael commanded. He grabbed a tattered wool blanket from the corner of the cabin and tossed it to the boy. "What is your name, brother?" "Torin," the boy answered, wrapping the moth-eaten wool around his waist. He looked at Bael with wide, reverent eyes. "The hunters said you were a myth. They said the first wolf died a century ago. They told us resistance was impossible." "The hunters deal in lies," Bael stated. "Garrick uses shock collars to make you hunt your own kin. How many scouts did he send into this forest?" 3 tracking packs, Torin answered, shivering in the drafty cabin. "A dozen collared wolves, mixed with human handlers. They are sweeping the riverbanks right now." Bael looked at Nora. The golden fire in his eyes burned bright. The Primordial Alpha saw past the ruined door and the broken table. He saw an opportunity. "Nora broke your chains today," Bael told the boy. He placed a heavy hand on Torin's shoulder. "We do not need to hide anymore. We have our first soldier. Chapter 18. Torin stood by the cracked fireplace, clutching the wool blanket. A soldier? My king, we possess 0 weapons. The handlers carry silver nets and electric rifles. We are slaves. You are a wolf, Bael corrected. His voice echoed with ancient authority. The hunters made you forget your nature. They forced you into cages, but the cages are breaking. Nora can stun the handlers. I can snap the metal off your necks. Garrick sent an army to hunt us, but he just delivered us a pack. Torin's eyes widened. He looked at the scorched floorboards, then at the girl in the gray canvas apron. Hope, fragile and new, replaced the fear in his face. Go back into the woods, Bael ordered. Track the other scout packs. Stay out of sight from the human handlers. Speak to our brothers in the shadows. Tell them the true Alpha walks the earth again. Tell them to turn on their masters the second I break their lines. I will gather them, Torin vowed. He dropped the wool blanket, shifted back into his gray wolf form, and bolted through the shattered doorway into the thick forest. Silence fell over the cabin. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Nora let out a long breath. Her knees gave out. She sank to the floorboards, staring at her palms. I could have killed you both. The heat just poured out of me. I possessed no control over it. Bael walked over and knelt beside her. You protected the pack. You did not flinch. Nora looked up at his left shoulder. The gray wolf's teeth had torn a jagged gash through his muscle. Blood stained the waistband of his looted black cargo pants. Sit, Nora ordered, her medical instincts overriding her panic. She reached for the metal canteen hooked to her apron string. The mint salve is gone. I need to wash that bite before it festers. Bael sat on the floor, crossing his legs. He let her work. Nora uncapped the canteen and poured the cold water over the open wound. Bael hissed, his muscles turning rigid. Hold still, Nora murmured. She drew her stolen steel hunting knife and sliced a clean strip of fabric from the hem of her gray apron. She pressed the makeshift bandage against his bleeding shoulder, applying steady pressure. You make a terrible maid, Bael teased, his gravelly voice dropping to a soft rumble. You destroy doors, you burn floors, you ruin your own uniform. And you make a terrible demigod, Nora shot back. She kept her eyes focused on the bandage. You get captured in silver nets. You get bitten by your own subjects. You require a teenager to fight your battles. Bael reached up. His large, calloused hand cupped her cheek. The scorching fever of his touch sent a jolt straight to her heart. Nora stopped talking. She forgot about the bleeding shoulder. She forgot about the broken cabin and the hunters in the woods. I require you, Bael whispered. He leaned in. The distance vanished. He pressed his lips against hers. The kiss possessed none of the wild violence of the beast. It was slow, deliberate, and aching with vulnerability. Nora kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. He tasted like rain and raw power. A century of isolation broke apart in the dusty room. He claimed her, not as a master claims a servant, but as an equal. When they finally pulled apart, Nora rested her forehead against his chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. We are going to burn Garrick's empire down, Nora promised. Chapter 19. The quiet moment shattered. A sharp burst of static hissed from the corner of the room. Nora pulled away from Bael. She spun toward the canvas survival pack she looted from the hunter hours ago. The bag sat near the cracked fireplace. The static hissed again, louder this time, followed by the electronic beep of an open transmission. Nora scrambled across the scorched floorboards. She shoved her hands past the dried meat and the flint striker inside the bag. Her fingers closed around a heavy black brick radio shoved at the very bottom. She pulled it out. The device crackled to life. Captain Garrick's cruel voice filled the cabin. Attention, scout units, the captain broadcasted over the open frequency. The target remains at large, but we hold the bait. Nora stared at the black brick. Her blood ran cold. "Subject 0, Garrick continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I know you are listening. You possess stolen gear. You travel with the traitor maid. I want to offer you a simple trade." A muffled sob echoed over the radio speaker. Nora recognized the sound instantly. It was Mina, a fellow medical maid from Sub-Level 9. Mina shared Nora's shifts and snuck extra bread into her pockets when the rations ran low. "Please," Mina cried out. "Nora, don't let them—" A sharp smack cut Mina off. Garrick chuckled. "I hold the rest of the medical staff in the courtyard," Garrick announced. "Mina, Clara, and the old man who sweeps the upper tiers. They aided a fugitive. The penalty is death. Surrender yourself at the main gates by dawn, beast. If you do not appear, the staff faces the firing squad." The radio clicked off. The static died. Nora dropped the black brick. The plastic clattered against the wood floor. Her chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. Garrick planned to murder innocent people because she broke the collar. Bael stood up. The romantic warmth vanished from his golden eyes, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of the Primordial Alpha. The inner wolf roared for blood, thrashing against its mental cage. "He wants a monster," Bael growled. "I will give him one." "Bael, no," Nora pleaded. She pushed herself to her feet. "It is a trap. He will line the walls with silver nets and electric rifles. He wants you to walk into a firing squad." "I will not let your friends die for my freedom," Bael stated. He grabbed the ruined wooden door wedge from the floor and tossed it into the fireplace out of pure frustration. "I am the king. The pack protects its own. I will walk to the gates and tear Garrick apart before he pulls a trigger." "You cannot fight an entire garrison alone," Nora yelled. "You lack the strength. The silver burns drained you. Torin's bite drained you. Walking to the front gates is pure suicide." "Then what do you suggest?" Bael roared. His voice shook the rafters. "We hide in this rotting box while Garrick executes the girls who fed you." "I suggest we use our brains," Nora snapped. She marched up to the giant man, refusing to back down from his towering frame. She poked him hard in his bare chest. "You told me I am a scalpel. Scalpels do not hack at the front gates. They slip in through the side." Bael stared down at her. The wild rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by genuine curiosity. "You possess a plan." Chapter 20. "I possess a blueprint in my head," Nora corrected. She picked up the black radio and turned the volume knob all the way down. She did not want Garrick hearing their next moves. She turned to Bael, her tactical mind racing. The terrified maid vanished. The strategist emerged. "Garrick expects a frontal assault," Nora explained. She paced the dusty floorboards. "He will stack his best hunters at the main gate. He will point all the searchlights outward. He thinks we are desperate animals in the woods." "We are desperate," Bael noted, crossing his arms over his chest. The black cargo pants pulled tight against his muscles. "But we are not animals," Nora said. She stopped pacing and met his golden eyes. "I scrubbed every floor in that compound for 3 years. I know the blind spots. The bio-waste corridors we escaped through connect directly to the subterranean holding cells. That is where they keep the collared wolves waiting for deployment." Bael's eyes narrowed as the pieces clicked together. "The slave pens." "Exactly," Nora confirmed. "The night shift changes at 4 in the morning. The guards leave the lower levels to clock out at the upper barracks. There is a 10-minute window where Sector 4 sits empty." "We sneak in," Bael concluded. "We bypass the front gate entirely." "We go through the waste grates," Nora nodded. "We infiltrate the holding cells. You break the collars off every wolf locked in the dark. We do not fight Garrick from the outside. We explode from the inside." The inner beast barked in approval. The plan felt right. It relied on cunning, not just brute force. "Torin gathers the wild scouts in the woods," Bael summarized. "We free the prisoners in the basement. We catch Garrick between 2 packs." And while the hunters deal with a riot in the courtyard, Nora added, her voice turning cold, I find Garrick and save Mina and Clara. Bael looked at the girl in the torn gray apron. She stood tall, her hands resting on her hips near the stolen hunting knife. She possessed the spark of a demigod and the mind of a general. He felt a surge of fierce pride. Garrick believes he set a trap, Bael murmured, a dangerous smile touching his lips. He does not realize he locked himself inside a cage with us. We leave now, Nora decided. She checked her apron string, ensuring the canteen and the hunting knife remained secure. It will take hours to hike back to the compound and find the external waste grates. We need to be in position before the 4 o'clock shift change. Bael walked to the shattered doorway. He looked out into the darkening woods. The sun vanished, leaving the forest cloaked in shadows. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. It was a perfect night for a hunt. Stay close to me, Bael ordered. He stepped off the rotting porch and onto the dirt path. Try to keep up, Alpha, Nora teased, following him into the dark. They abandoned the ruined cabin. They walked toward the belly of the beast, ready to tear the Confederation apart.
Chapter 21.
The hike back to the Confederation compound tested the limits of human endurance. The dark woods offered zero comfort. Thorny brush snagged Nora's torn gray canvas uniform, scratching her arms and legs. She ignored the sting. She marched behind Bael, keeping her eyes fixed on his broad back. The Primordial Alpha set a punishing pace. He moved through the dense forest with silent precision. The blood-stained strip of gray cloth wrapped around his left shoulder held firm, keeping the bite wound sealed. Hours passed. The temperature dropped, bringing a biting chill to the night air. Nora kept her right hand resting on the hilt of her stolen steel hunting knife. Her left hand gripped the strap of the canvas survival pack. The black brick radio inside the bag remained quiet. Captain Garrick had made his threat and signed off, leaving the silence to poison her thoughts. She pictured Mina and Clara kneeling in the cold courtyard. A cold spike drove through her ribs at the image. We are close, Bael murmured. He stopped near a thick cluster of ancient pines. Nora stepped up beside him. Through the break in the trees, the looming concrete walls of the Confederation stronghold rose against the night sky. Massive searchlights swept across the perimeter, cutting through the darkness with blinding white beams. The front gates teemed with activity. Dozens of armed hunters paced the barricades, holding electric rifles ready. Jeeps idled in the dirt, their engines humming a low warning. Garrick had turned the main entrance into an impenetrable fortress. He stacked the deck, Nora observed. She watched a searchlight sweep past their hiding spot. Let him watch the front door, Bael replied. He turned his golden eyes away from the barricades. Where is the intake grate? Follow the perimeter wall west, Nora instructed. Past the motor pool, there is a drainage ditch that filters the runoff from the bio-waste corridors. They left the tree line and crept through the tall grass bordering the compound walls. They stayed low, timing their movements to avoid the sweeping beams of light. The smell of the forest faded. The harsh scent of bleach and old rust seeped into the air, signaling the proximity of Sector 4. They reached the concrete ditch. At the bottom sat a heavy, rusted iron grate built into the foundation of the wall. Water trickled through the thick metal bars. Nora slid down the concrete embankment. She pulled her hunting knife and used the heavy steel blade to scrape the worst of the mud and grime away from the edges of the grate. There are no electronic locks down here. The council assumed the sheer weight of the iron would keep intruders out. Bael dropped into the ditch beside her. He did not bother with tools. He grabbed the rusted iron bars with both hands. The muscles in his arms shifted and locked. He planted his boots against the concrete wall and pulled. The thick metal groaned in protest. Flakes of orange rust rained down on his boots. With a harsh grating sound, the heavy frame tore free from the stone. Bael set the iron grate aside, revealing a dark, circular pipe. Ladies first, Bael offered. Nora crawled into the pipe. The space was tight and smelled of chemical cleaners. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees. Bael followed close behind, his broad shoulders scraping the curved concrete walls. They navigated the claustrophobic tunnel for 10 minutes before the pipe sloped upward and ended at a steel maintenance hatch. Nora pushed the hatch open. She climbed out into the familiar red glow of the bio-waste corridors. The underground hallway sat in eerie silence. Red emergency lights bathed the concrete in a bloody hue. Nora checked a digital clock mounted on the wall above a hazard bin. The red numbers read 3:56 a.m. 4 minutes, Nora whispered. She backed into a recessed alcove, pulling Bael into the shadows with her. They waited. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. At exactly 4 o'clock, a loud buzzer echoed through the subterranean levels. The heavy metal doors at the far end of the corridor slid open. A squad of 5 tired guards trudged out of Sector 4. The men carried their electric rifles slung over their shoulders, eager to reach the upper barracks and sleep. They marched past the alcove without looking into the shadows. The heavy doors hissed shut behind them. The lower levels were officially empty. Nora stepped out of the alcove. A cold spike of adrenaline pierced her chest. She pointed down the empty hallway toward a secondary reinforced door marked with a yellow hazard triangle. "The holding cells are through there," Nora said. "Then we wake the pack," Bael replied. He strode down the red-lit corridor, ready to tear the Empire apart from the inside out. Chapter 22. Nora approached the reinforced door of the subterranean holding cells. She possessed no keycard. A heavy electronic keypad sat mounted on the concrete wall, its red indicator light blinking a steady warning. She did not let panic stall her momentum. During her 3 years scrubbing these exact floors, she watched the lazy maintenance workers bypass the digital locks whenever they misplaced their badges. She reached into her apron string and drew her steel hunting knife. "Stand back," Nora told the Alpha. She jammed the tip of the heavy steel blade into the seam of the keypad casing. She applied pressure, twisting the knife until the plastic cover popped off the wall, exposing a tangle of colored wires. She reached in with her bare fingers, stripped the green manual release wire, and crossed it directly to the blue power feed. The keypad sparked. The red indicator light flashed green. The heavy deadbolts inside the door clicked open. "Efficient," Bael noted. Nora shoved the door open. A wave of stagnant air hit them. The subterranean holding cells stretched into the darkness. The cavernous room resembled a dungeon. Rows of small, iron-barred cages lined the concrete walls, stacked 2 tiers high. Inside the cramped pens sat dozens of wolves in their shifted forms. The Confederation kept them locked in their animal states, denying them the dignity of human skin. Every beast wore a thick black metal shock collar around its neck. The red indicator lights on the bands blinked in unison, a cruel reminder of their slavery. Despair hung heavy in the room. The captive wolves lay on the cold stone floors of their cages, their eyes dull and defeated. Bael stepped into the center of the room. He did not speak. He did not roar. He simply let the full weight of his primordial presence fill the space. The reaction was instantaneous. Heads snapped up, ears swiveled forward. The dull eyes of the captive beasts ignited with sudden recognition. The true king had returned. A low, unified rumble of submission echoed through the cavernous hall. The sound vibrated in Nora's chest, a powerful chorus of wild loyalty. "Break the latches," Bael commanded. Nora sprinted toward the first row of iron cages. She ignored the digital keypads. She used the hilt of her hunting knife to smash the manual override levers on the cage doors. The iron bars swung open. Bael did the real work. He moved from cage to cage, reaching in with his bare hands. He grabbed the thick black metal bands clamped around the wolves' necks. He ignored the low-level shocks the collars emitted. He used raw, brutal strength to snap the locking mechanisms. Broken metal rained onto the concrete floor. As each collar fell, the madness left the wolves' eyes. They stepped out of their cramped cages, their muscles shaking. They bowed their massive heads to Bael, pledging their lives to the Alpha. Nora smashed her 10th latch. She moved to the next row, sweat beading on her forehead. The army was growing. 10 wolves turned to 20. 20 turned to 40. The room filled with the quiet rustle of shifting fur and scraping claws. The plan was working. Nora reached up to smash another lever when a cold voice echoed from the far end of the hall. "Well, this is a pathetic display of insubordination." Nora spun around. Bael stopped mid-stride, dropping a shattered collar to the floor. A woman stood in the doorway leading to the upper compound. She wore sweeping crimson robes that marked her as a high-tier witch of the Confederation Council. A silver staff rested in her right hand, the tip glowing with volatile purple energy. Her eyes swept over the freed wolves, landing on the Primordial Alpha. "Subject 0, the witch sneered. "Garrick warned us you might attempt a rat's entrance. I volunteered to watch the basement." "You are outnumbered, witch," Bael growled. The freed wolves flanked him, baring their teeth and letting out vicious snarls. "Numbers mean nothing against true power," the woman countered. She slammed the base of her silver staff against the concrete floor. A shockwave of purple magic rippled outward, hitting the closest row of iron cages. The metal warped and shrieked under the magical pressure. At the same time, a blaring siren erupted from the ceiling speakers. Flashing strobe lights turned the holding pens into a chaotic nightmare. The stealth mission was dead. "Guards to the lower pens!" the witch shouted into a communicator on her wrist. "We have a breach! Terminate the rogue assets!" Bael did not wait for her to cast another spell. He lunged forward, leading his new pack into the fray. Chapter 23. The blast doors at the far end of the hall groaned open. Elite hunters poured into the subterranean holding pens. These were not the standard perimeter guards. They wore heavy tactical armor and carried long, silver-tipped stun batons designed to drop a full-grown werewolf in a single strike. "Stay behind me, Nora," Bael roared over the blaring sirens. Nora backed against a row of empty iron cages. She gripped her hunting knife tight. The air turned thick with chaos. Bael met the first wave of elite hunters with devastating force. He refused to shift into his primordial wolf form. A shift would expose his broad back to the silver-tipped batons, risking the same magic-draining burn that brought him down in the woods. He relied on raw, untamed human strength. A hunter swung a crackling baton at his head. Bael ducked the strike. He caught the man's armored forearm and twisted. A sharp snap echoed over the sirens. The hunter screamed and dropped the weapon. Bael grabbed the man by the tactical vest and hurled him across the room. The heavy body crashed into a second squad of guards, scattering them like discarded toys. The freed wolves surged forward, moving as a unified wave of fangs and claws. They tackled the armored hunters to the concrete floor, tearing at the vulnerable gaps in the tactical gear. The room became a blur of spinning red lights and brutal combat. Nora watched the demigod fight. Bael was a force of nature. He waded through the elite guards, shrugging off glancing blows from the stun batons. When a hunter managed to land a solid strike against his ribs, Bael did not flinch. He grabbed the rubber shaft of the baton, avoiding the silver tip, and headbutted the guard with bone-crushing impact. 2 hunters broke away from the main brawl. They spotted Nora backed against the cages. They raised their electric rifles, aiming the silver-laced stun darts right at her chest. Nora did not wait for Bael to save her. She drew on the tiny spark inside her chest. She did not unleash the roaring fire that destroyed the cabin floorboards. She remembered the lesson in the woods: precision. She focused the heat into the palms of her hands. She targeted the metal barrels of the approaching electric rifles. She pushed a concentrated spike of thermal energy straight into the weapons. The steel barrels glowed cherry red in an instant. The internal wiring melted into useless slag. The extreme heat burned through the hunters' tactical gloves. The men yelped in pain and dropped the ruined rifles to the concrete. Before they could draw their sidearms, two huge gray wolves leaped over a row of cages. The beasts landed on the disarmed hunters, pinning them to the floor with brutal efficiency. "We need to move," Nora yelled, rushing toward Bael. "The entire garrison is coming down here." Bael tossed a final hunter into the wall. He stood amidst a pile of groaning guards, his chest heaving. The bite wound on his shoulder bled fresh down his arm, but his golden eyes burned with victory. The elite squad was decimated. The high-tier witch in the crimson robes had fled up the stairs the moment the wolves breached the lines. "The pack holds the basement," Bael declared, looking at the freed wolves securing the perimeter. He turned to Nora. "We go to the courtyard. We end Garrick." Nora nodded. She checked her apron, ensuring the canteen and survival pack remained secure. She led the way toward the concrete stairwell at the back of the hall. The stairs led directly to the upper levels and the central courtyard. They left the riot behind. They charged up the concrete steps, the sound of blaring sirens masking their approach. Nora felt a surge of adrenaline. They survived the trap in the basement. Now it was time to save Mina and Clara. Chapter 24. Nora kicked the heavy metal door at the top of the stairwell open. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of vehicle exhaust and burning electricity from the crackling searchlights. They burst into the central courtyard. The space was cavernous, paved with flat gray concrete. Heavy armored transports lined the perimeter fence. The riot in the basement had drawn most of the guards away, leaving the courtyard surprisingly bare. In the dead center of the concrete square stood Captain Garrick. He wore his pristine black uniform, holding his blue crackling electric shock stick. Behind him, kneeling on the hard ground, were three figures bound with thick zip ties. Nora recognized Mina's tear-stained face. Clara and the old sweeper knelt beside her, their heads bowed in terror. Surrounding Garrick and the hostages stood a circle of 6 high-tier witches. They wore identical crimson robes. They held silver staffs planted hard against the concrete, their eyes locked on the stairwell door. "Right on time," Garrick sneered. He tapped the shock stick against his boot. "The basement alarm was a wonderful distraction. I knew you would not abandon your little friends." "Let them go, Garrick," Nora demanded. She stepped out of the stairwell, her hand gripping the hilt of her hunting knife. "You are in no position to make demands, maid," Garrick replied. He pointed the shock stick at Bael. "You brought the beast directly to the slaughter." Bael did not waste time talking. The inner wolf roared for vengeance. The Primordial Alpha planted his boots and launched himself across the courtyard, aiming straight for the hunter captain. Garrick did not flinch. He raised his left hand and snapped his fingers. The 6 witches slammed their silver staffs against the pavement in perfect unison. A blinding flash of golden light erupted from the ground. A specialized containment field sprang to life, forming a massive dome of crackling magical energy around the center of the courtyard. Bael hit the invisible barrier at full speed. The kinetic impact sounded like a bomb detonating. The magical field held firm. Searing golden chains of pure energy lashed out from the barrier, wrapping tight around Bael's wrists, chest, and legs. The magic burned with the intensity of raw silver. Bael let out a roar of agony. The golden chains yanked him backward, suspending him in midair inches from the barrier wall. He thrashed and pulled, his muscles bulging under the black canvas pants, but the witch's combined magic was too strong. The containment field locked the demigod in place. "Bael!" Nora screamed. She sprinted forward, drawing her steel knife. She aimed for the closest witch, ready to break the circle and drop the field. Garrick anticipated the move. He pressed a button on a remote hidden in his pocket. A secondary, smaller containment ring erupted from the concrete beneath Nora's boots. A cylinder of solid purple light surrounded her, trapping her inside a space no larger than a phone booth. Nora slammed her fists against the purple energy wall. The magic sparked, stinging her knuckles but refused to yield. She was caged. Garrick walked to the edge of the golden dome. He looked up at the suspended, struggling Alpha. A cruel smile twisted the captain's face. Did you really think a few broken collars would topple my empire? Garrick taunted. He ignited his electric shock stick. The blue sparks danced near Bael's face. The Confederation built this world on control. You are nothing but a wild dog, playing at rebellion. Garrick turned his back on Bael and walked toward the kneeling hostages. He grabbed Mina by the hair, hauling the terrified maid to her feet. No! Nora pounded on the purple barrier. Her breathing turned ragged. A vice clamped around her spine, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Watch closely, Subject Zero, Garrick commanded. He pressed the crackling tip of the shock stick against Mina's neck. This is the price of a broken leash. Chapter 25. Garrick pressed the crackling blue tip of the shock stick against Mina's pale neck. The young maid squeezed her eyes shut. Tears tracked through the dirt on her cheeks. She awaited the lethal jolt of electricity. Clara and the old sweeper whimpered beside her, their hands bound tight with thick plastic zip ties. Look at them, Alpha, Garrick taunted. His voice echoed across the wide concrete courtyard. Look at the fragile little things that fed you. They die because you refused to stay in the dark. Bael let out a deafening roar. He thrashed against the searing golden chains. The magical bonds bit into his bare chest and arms, mimicking the agonizing burn of raw silver. Smoke curled from his skin. The deep bite wound on his left shoulder tore wider, sending fresh blood sliding down his ribs. The crimson fluid pooled at the waistband of his looted black cargo pants. He fought the snare with every ounce of his demigod strength. Tear the snare! Break the sky! The inner beast raged, thrashing against the mental cage. The primordial wolf wanted to manifest, to rip the magic apart with teeth and claws. We can't shift, Bael answered, gritting his teeth against the searing pain. The magic mirrors the silver. It drains the core. He hung suspended in midair, a king trapped in a glowing cage, forced to watch the execution. The 6 high-tier witches stood in a perfect circle, their crimson robes whipping in the wind. They held their silver staffs planted hard against the pavement, chanting in a language older than the compound. Nora pounded her bare fists against the curved wall of the purple containment cylinder. The magical barrier sparked, burning her knuckles with a nasty static shock. She ignored the sting. A vice clamped around her chest. The air inside the small magical phone booth grew thin and stale. She watched Garrick smile. She watched the man she loved burn in midair. A mental block inside her mind snapped. It felt like a thick pane of glass shattering in her skull. For 19 years, the Confederation Council fed her a specific narrative. They told her she possessed a defective spark. They forced her parents to borrow 50,000 silver marks just to hire the best tutors, hoping to fix a broken girl. When the sickness took her family, the council handed her a mop. They forced her to scrub the subterranean bio-waste corridors. She spent her days keeping her head down, believing she was weak. Bael taught her the truth. He called her a weapon. He called her a scalpel. He proved the high-tier witches relied on wide, clumsy hammers of borrowed energy. Nora stopped hitting the purple wall. She lowered her bruised hands and took a step backward. She stood in the center of the cramped cylinder. The cold night air couldn't penetrate the trap, but Nora no longer felt the chill. She closed her eyes. She reached deep into her chest and found the tiny spark of heat resting near her heart. She didn't try to smother it. She fed it. She fed it the years of humiliation. She fed it the crushing weight of the fake debt. She fed it the agonizing sight of the Alpha locked in glowing chains. The spark consumed the anger. It morphed from a flickering candle into a roaring, untamed furnace. The heat radiated from her core, turning her blood to liquid fire. Her skin flushed a deep red. The edges of her torn gray canvas apron began to smoke, the fabric turning brittle. The metal canteen and steel hunting knife at her hip grew hot to the touch. The canvas survival pack slung over her shoulder felt warm. This wasn't the structured magic of the crimson-robed witches. This was pure, destructive thermal energy. Nora opened her eyes. The irises burned with a bright, terrifying orange light. She raised her bare hands and placed her palms flat against the solid purple light of the containment field. She didn't aim for a microscopic pin. She didn't use precision. She unleashed the powder keg. A shockwave of rippling thermal energy erupted from her body. The kinetic force hit the purple magic. The barrier shrieked, emitting a high-pitched whine that drowned out the sirens. Hairline fractures spiderwebbed across the cylinder wall. Garrick turned his head, his cruel smile vanishing. With a sound like a thunderclap, the secondary containment ring detonated. Shattered fragments of purple energy rained down on the gray concrete, fizzling into nothing before they hit the ground. A wave of blistering, oven-hot air washed over the courtyard. The shockwave hit the closest witches, knocking two of the crimson-robed women off their feet. Nora stepped forward out of the smoke. The concrete floor beneath her boots smoldered, scorched black by the extreme temperature. Garrick stumbled backward, pulling his shock stick away from Mina's neck. The hunter captain stared at the former medical maid. Fear, raw and unfiltered, crept into his eyes. "Terminate her!" Garrick screamed at the remaining witches, pointing a shaking finger at Nora. Nora didn't flinch. The debt slave was dead. The weapon was awake. Chapter 26. The two fallen witches scrambled to their feet. They joined the other four, turning their silver staffs away from the suspended Alpha and pointing them straight at Nora. The golden dome flickered. The magical chains holding Bael loosened a fraction, but the snare held. "Burn the maid!" the lead witch commanded. 4 blasts of concentrated purple energy shot across the concrete courtyard. Nora didn't dive for cover. She stood her ground, her orange eyes tracking the incoming magic. She raised her right hand. She pushed a wall of superheated air out from her palm. The thermal shield met the purple magic mid-flight. The offensive spells hit the heat wall and evaporated into harmless steam. The witches stared in sheer panic. Their borrowed council magic possessed no counter to raw, unchained thermal force. "My turn," Nora stated. She zeroed in on the lead witch. Nora focused her mind, channeling the heat into a tight, invisible beam. She targeted the center of the silver staff. The metal grew cherry red in a fraction of a second. The witch shrieked in pain as the superheated silver burned her palms. She dropped the staff. The metal hit the concrete and warped into a useless, melted slag. Nora repeated the process. She shifted her gaze from one crimson-robed woman to the next. She melted a second staff, then a third. The witches broke their circle, nursing their blistered hands and running toward the armored transports for cover. With half the circle broken, the giant golden dome overhead destabilized. The magical structure groaned, flickered, and shattered like a fragile glass bulb. The searing golden chains vanished. Bael plummeted toward the earth. He hit the gray pavement hard, landing on his hands and knees. The impact jarred his bones, but the agony of the magical snare was gone. He took a ragged breath, pulling the cool night air into his burning lungs. "We're free," the inner wolf snarled, hungry for blood. "Kill the hunters!" Bael pushed himself up. The black canvas cargo pants hung low on his hips. The gray cloth bandage around his shoulder was soaked dark crimson, but the Primordial Alpha ignored the damage. He stood tall, cracking his neck. His golden eyes locked onto a fresh squad of elite hunters pouring out of the perimeter guardhouse. "Secure the hostages," Bael ordered Nora, his gravelly voice carrying over the chaos. "I'll handle the reinforcements." Bael charged the incoming guards. He remained in his human form, refusing to risk another silver net trapping his wolf state. He met the first hunter with a devastating right hook. The blow shattered the man's tactical helmet, sending him spinning into the dirt. A second hunter lunged with an electric baton. Bael dodged the strike, caught the man by the armored collar, and threw him over the hood of a nearby transport lorry. Nora sprinted toward the center of the courtyard. Garrick abandoned the hostages the moment the golden dome fell. He retreated toward the main gate, shouting orders into his wrist communicator. Nora reached Mina, Clara, and the old sweeper. She drew her heavy steel hunting knife and sliced through the thick plastic zip ties binding their wrists. "Get to the stairwell," Nora ordered, helping Mina to her feet. "Run down to the bio-waste corridors and hide in the maintenance alcoves. Torin holds the basement." "Nora, you're burning," Mina choked out, staring at the smoking edges of the gray apron. "I'm fine," Nora promised, offering a fierce smile. "Go!" The 3 medical staff fled toward the heavy metal door, disappearing into the subterranean safety. Nora turned back to the fight. Bael was a one-man wrecking crew. He tore through the elite squad, using brute strength to dismantle the hunters. But 2 guards managed to flank him, raising their electric rifles to take aim at his blind spot. Nora pointed her bare hands at the flanking guards. She pushed a blast of kinetic heat across the pavement. The thermal wave caught the hunters in the chest, sweeping them off their feet and slamming them into the chain-link fence. Bael finished the last guard and looked over his shoulder. He caught her eye. The Alpha gave a sharp, approving nod. They moved in perfect synchronization, a demigod and a weapon, clearing the courtyard of Confederation resistance. Nora scanned the chaotic scene. She spotted a pristine black uniform moving near the armored transports. Captain Garrick was trying to start a jeep to flee the compound. Nora gripped her hunting knife. The strategist in her mind mapped the quickest route to the vehicle. She stepped over a groaning guard and marched toward the motor pool. The captain owed her parents 50,000 marks, and she intended to collect. Chapter 27. The engine of the armored transport roared to life. Captain Garrick slammed the jeep into gear. He planned to abandon his men, his stronghold, and his empire to save his own skin. Nora didn't run. She stepped into the path of the accelerating vehicle. She raised both hands, her orange eyes locking onto the metal grille of the jeep. She channeled the roaring furnace inside her chest, pushing a concentrated beam of extreme thermal energy straight into the engine block. The steel hood glowed white-hot in a matter of seconds. The radiator boiled over, blowing a geyser of scalding steam into the night air. The internal components melted and fused together. The engine shrieked, seized, and died, sending the heavy vehicle skidding to a violent halt mere inches from Nora's boots. Garrick kicked the driver's side door open. He stumbled out onto the concrete, coughing through the thick white smoke. He held his crackling blue shock stick in his right hand. His pristine black uniform was smeared with soot and dirt. "You ruined everything!" Garrick screamed. The composed, arrogant hunter captain was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered man. "The Confederation will send 100 battalions to this forest. They will burn you alive." "The council will fall," Nora stated. She drew her heavy steel hunting knife from the leather sheath at her hip. She stepped through the smoke, closing the distance. "And you won't be around to watch." Garrick lunged. He swung the electric shock stick in a wide, desperate arc, aiming for her head. Nora remembered the tactical lesson in the ruined cabin. Get inside his guard. The stick is useless. She ducked under the crackling blue tip. She stepped forward, using his momentum against him. She grabbed his right wrist with her bare hand. She didn't use the knife. She used her spark. She pushed a surge of boiling heat straight into his wrist. Garrick howled in agony. The flesh beneath his tactical glove blistered. His grip failed. The shock stick clattered to the gray pavement. Nora kicked the weapon away. She kept her grip on his wrist and shoved him backward. Garrick hit the side of the ruined jeep, sliding down the scorched metal until he hit the concrete. He looked up at her, cradling his burned hand against his chest. Genuine terror filled his eyes. The girl who scrubbed his floors now stood over him like an avenging spirit. "I own your debt," Garrick gasped, grasping for any remaining leverage. "I own you." "The ledger is wiped," Nora replied. She raised her left hand, pointing her palm at his chest. She didn't hesitate. She unleashed a final, focused blast of kinetic heat. The thermal strike hit Garrick square in the sternum. The impact stopped his heart in a single, brutal second. The hunter captain slumped against the tire of the jeep, his eyes wide and vacant. The diabolical project was over. Nora lowered her hand. The roaring furnace in her chest dimmed, returning to a steady, quiet hum. The bright orange light faded from her irises, leaving her natural color behind. Exhaustion hit her like a falling tree branch. Her knees buckled. A pair of strong, familiar arms caught her before she hit the concrete. Bael pulled her against his broad chest. He held her upright, his steady body heat offering comfort against the chill of the night wind. "The captain is dead," Bael noted, looking down at Garrick's lifeless body. "I collected the debt," Nora murmured, resting her head against his bare shoulder. She avoided the bloody bandage, leaning against his uninjured side. The sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement drew their attention. Torin burst through the shattered chain link of the main gates. The young werewolf had shifted back into his human form, wearing a pair of looted tactical pants from a fallen perimeter guard. Behind him poured dozens of wild wolves. The scouts from the woods had breached the outer defenses, answering the call of the true Alpha. The remaining human guards in the courtyard took one look at the giant pack of snarling beasts and dropped their weapons. The fight left them. The surviving crimson-robed witches stood near the perimeter fence, their hands raised in surrender. Torin jogged across the courtyard and stopped before Bael. He looked at the fallen captain, then bowed his head to Nora and the demigod. "The compound is secure, my king," Torin reported. "The guards yield. The witches beg for mercy. The pack awaits your command." Chapter 28. The dawn broke over the tree line, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple and pale gold. The harsh white searchlights of the compound flickered and died, leaving the stronghold bathed in natural morning light. Bael stood in the center of the concrete courtyard. He addressed the gathered pack. Over 100 werewolves sat on the pavement, a mix of freed subterranean slaves and wild forest scouts. They watched him with reverent silence. "For a century, the Confederation treated us like wild dogs," Bael's gravelly voice carried across the square. "They locked us in the dark. They forced us to hunt our own brothers. They believed iron bars and silver nets could tame the first wolf." A low, unified growl rumbled through the pack. The sound vibrated against the metal fences. "Today, we break the cages," Bael declared. He pointed to Garrick's discarded shock stick and the melted silver staffs resting on the pavement. "Gather every piece of control metal in this compound, from the holding cells to the courtyard. Melt it down to slag. Let no wolf wear a leash ever again. This stronghold no longer belongs to the human hunters. It belongs to the pack." The wolves howled. The sound rose into the morning sky, a wild, beautiful chorus of freedom that echoed for miles through the untamed woods. Bael turned his golden eyes toward the 6 surviving witches. The women huddled near the perimeter fence, stripped of their silver staffs and shivering in their crimson robes. "Go back to your council," Bael commanded them. "Tell the high-tier cowards that Subject Zero is dead. Tell them Bael reclaims his throne. If any hunter or witch sets foot in this forest again, I'll bring my army to your city steps and burn your grand halls to the dirt. Run!" The witches didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled through the ruined main gates and fled down the logging road, vanishing into the trees. Nora watched the scene unfold from the hood of an intact armored transport. She sat with her legs dangling over the bumper, her hands resting on the empty metal canteen hooked to her apron. Mina, Clara, and the old sweeper sat beside her. They were bruised and exhausted, but alive. "You're a terrifying person, Nora," Mina whispered, staring at the scorched black concrete near Garrick's body. "I watched you scrub toilets for 3 years. I had no idea you possessed a bomb inside your chest." "Neither did I," Nora admitted. She let her hands fall from the empty flask at her hip. "But I prefer it over the mop." Torin approached the transport lorry. The young wolf offered Nora a deep, respectful bow. "The medical bays are secure. The pack will not harm the human staff who aided you. You have our word." "Thank you, Torin," Nora said. "Make sure they get safe passage to the nearest civilian town. They deserve a quiet life." Torin nodded and jogged away to organize the perimeter patrols. Bael walked across the courtyard. The pack parted for him, dropping their heads in respect as the Primordial Alpha passed. He reached the transport lorry and stopped in front of Nora. The battle scars on his chest caught the morning light. The bloody canvas bandage on his left shoulder needed changing, and his looted black pants were torn at the calves. He looked like a ruined, dangerous god. He looked perfect. Bael reached up and placed his large hands on her waist. He lifted her off the hood of the lorry, setting her down with care on the concrete. The blistering warmth of his skin thawed her cold hands. "The accountant is dead," Bael noted, a soft, genuine smile touching his lips. "The debt ledger is erased." 50,000 marks wiped clean, Nora agreed. She rested her hands flat against his bare chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I'm unemployed." "Good," Bael murmured. "The pack requires a tactician. The king requires an equal." Nora raised an eyebrow, her signature sass returning. "An equal? You command an entire army of giant wolves. I'm just a girl who knows how to break locks and melt engine blocks." "You're the weapon that shattered an empire," Bael corrected. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You stood your ground against a demigod in a dark cell. You never flinched. You never bowed." Nora smiled. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his thick neck, mindful of his injured shoulder. "I guess I can stay and help you run this place. Someone has to make sure you don't starve yourself out of stubborn pride." Bael let out a rough bark of laughter. He pulled her flush against him and kissed her under the rising sun. The kiss sealed a new era for the wild territory. The medical maid was gone. The Primordial Alpha had his mate, and the Confederation would never sleep in peace again. The end. The Empire is in ashes. The silver chains are broken, but the fire between Nora and Bael is just igniting. We know the Primordial Alpha claimed his mate in front of the pack, but do you want to know what happens when he locks the heavy oak door to the captain's suite and gets his fierce tactician all to himself? I wrote a full, steamy bonus epilogue where Bael and Nora celebrate their victory, and each other, with zero interruptions. It brings the intense heat, the possessive alpha energy, and the ultimate romantic payoff you deserve after surviving the dark tunnels of Sublevel 9. To unlock this spicy, uncut chapter, click the link in the description below, or head straight over to www.patreon.com/Lena Pierce right now. Join the pack on Patreon to get instant access to the bonus epilogue and support the channel so I can keep bringing you more fierce heroines and untamed alphas. The link is waiting for you in the description. I will see you behind closed doors.